So today, Patrick Young joins us on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Just last Friday, he was up there and he was ringing the bell for us. And today I've got him down here. Well, I first met Patrick about 2 years ago when he interviewed me at the FIA annual BOCA event. I've known about Patrick for many, many years. If you're in the exchange business, you know Patrick. And I think I could never start my morning any better than reading the newsletter, Exchange Invest, that Patrick puts out. Now, Patrick has had a very varied career. I understand you've been a photojournalist and you spent about 2 decades being a trader, an analyst, being a broker, and you were also at some point the CEO of a Romanian stock exchange.
Yes.
Which is quite exciting. We are so happy to have you here. And now the capital markets revolution, which I understand you wrote over 25 years ago, your big differentiator, which sort of I see and we see, is that you managed to get information better than anyone else. You've managed to remember everything, and you connect these data points in a way that nobody else is able to do. And to me, it feels like that's sort of how you came to develop the capital markets revolution. How exactly do you do that?
In one way, I'm both cursed and blessed in financial markets because I'm a lateral thinker. And actually, I thought to be good at financial markets, I needed to be a lateral thinker. Whereas what I realize is that so much of our financial market structure is purely linear. I mean, people get up in the morning, they do all of their trades, they close up at the end of the day. But it is very interesting because obviously most of our life is spent in linear trends. We get up in the morning, we have our cup of coffee, we read our Exchange Invest with that cup of coffee over breakfast, and then we go to work, etc., etc. And there are certain inflection points. I mean, George Soros actually wrote quite a lot about that in his philosophies on markets, about the inflection points are really, really significant because they're the things that blow everything away. So therefore, on the downside, there can be something like the 1929 great stock market crash, which obviously reset the whole relationship between the stock market and the rest of the world. There are lots of other instances. So how do I get to where I get to thinking? I'm just fascinated by history. I'm fascinated by people who think out of the box. I love racing cars. And when it came to finance, I suppose I gravitated towards the people who were really lateral thinkers, and I thought about how incredible it was that some men survived 30, 40, 50-year careers, some ladies survived 30, 40, 50-year careers, and then some guys came along and they just did something so completely different. Robert Holmescourt, famous Australian entrepreneur, investor. I suppose in the 1920s here they would have called him a stock plunger. He thought of something, went in, and actually the London Stock Exchange had to change their rules after he did it once.
Wow.
And I guess that's it. I just love looking at why people do things.
Always asking questions.
You just got to stay curious and keep asking questions. And when you're working in finance, the most important thing is don't stick to your own desk. Ask the guys and the girls what they're doing at the desk next to you.
I know, it's amazing. And actually when you talk about trying to figure out what's right and predicting something, in the capital markets revolution, there were predictions that you made. Some probably moved faster than you thought, some slower, or some didn't happen at all. Are there any things that you sort of think about that are the most interesting from when you look back and today?
I think what's really interesting is, I mean, for example, I talked about the way that essentially we would create digital assets, and a currency could be based on any form of an asset. And here we are 25 years later and everybody's talking about cryptocurrency and digital assets in that sense. Now, it's vitally important that I point out at this point in time that despite being a gentleman of a certain age, I am one of the few men of my ilk who is not claiming to be Satoshi Nakamoto. And in fact, I didn't see the blockchain coming through that whole process. So that was something quite different. So you see some things but not the other. And I guess, you know, it's a bit like sort of the Betamax delusion. A lot of the things that looked incredibly exciting, they were going to be the things that worked. Didn't work. But then you look at the technological cycles. So in the book, we talk about Optimark. Now, Optimark was this magnificent stock exchange coming out of Arizona where they were doing a perpetual series of auctions every time liquidity got large enough. And what's so funny about that is in effectively 1998 to 2002, one, it just wasn't possible for people's brains to process this. Second of all, it was not possible for people to really get the IT onto their desk in the same way, although Optimark worked very, very well. But yet within a decade, you see the biggest fundamental change in, for example, floor trading on the New York Stock Exchange that we saw in 100 years with the introduction of the closing auction. And the way that that's come in, but then again, and you were asking, how do I manage to think laterally, linearly, how do I come up with this stuff? Look at history. What was the history of the New York Stock Exchange? Until we were into the mid-1870s, it was still a case of a large gavel being held above a block by the chairman,
Yep.
and he would sit there and preside over a 5-minute call auction in each stock.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing.
And so people get used to something and think it's going to be the forever thing,
And it
like
doesn't.
endlessly
Keep changing.
continuous trading, which is really a relatively recent thing in the history of stock exchanges when we go back 400 or 500 years.
One thing I'm always interested in, sort of looking at where you are now and how you talk about your history, what type of mentors did you have? Like, I always try to look at the mentors that I had that helped me. What mentors that you had, or who did you go to ask for advice and direction?
I didn't even know the word mentor existed until about 15 years ago. So
We probably didn't talk about
actually,
mentors
this is a great example of where I feel, oh gosh, if only I'd had a mentor. So I was lucky. I was very into car racing as a kid, and that was my early piece of entrepreneurship. I ran what they would call here vintage auto racing in Ireland, the first couple of series before I was even in high school. And that was fortunate because I met a lot of people who were successful, had money, and they imparted bits of information. And I actually was very lucky because I had one or two people who were early adopters of what I might call the jet set, which was not happening a lot in the north of Ireland, a very provincial place in that period of time. So I learned about things that were going on, and I got little nuggets of advice. One beautiful piece of advice that I got was, remember son, when you're traveling, always get yourself the room with the view. It's more expensive, but when you're jet lagged out of your mind and you pull the curtains back, it's easy to remember where you are. Actually, in exchanges, I have been very, very lucky because a lot of fantastic people, I wouldn't say they mentored me, but they provided a lot of information. The original Chief Technology Officer of the Australian Stock Exchange, Rory Collins, who was marvellous. The ultimate English gentleman who was unreconstructed despite an entire professional career in Australia, and he was 60-something when I met him. Sir Brian Williamson, who gave a great speech just a few weeks ago about one of the great life staff at a party that was run in London. Sir Brian Williamson was inspirational, and I remember coming back to Capital Market Revolution, he stopped his car on the way to a fishing trip somewhere in the north of England, and he had a car phone. Now that was when car phone involved, something that was the size of a mini computer being stashed in the boot, you in the trunk. You couldn't possibly get everything you originally wanted to get in the trunk, even of a large car. And he called me where he had appropriate cell, and he phoned me up and he said, "This is fantastic. I do not know how you've done this." So maybe that's shades of my career. Nobody knows how I managed to think of these things, and maybe I don't know either. But he phoned up and said, "This is fantastic. It is perfect. I cannot believe it." They went forth, they ordered lots of copies, they were huge sponsors of the book
That's
25 years ago. And of course we come full circle, because then we have the president of the New York Stock Exchange, the incredible Lynn Martin. The first book she's given as she comes out of being a tech nerd into being in the exchange world is by the Life Exchange, because that's where she's working. And they said, you'll get this because this is the melding, the synthesis of technology into markets, and you want to read this. And that was, I think, 22, 23 years ago she read it. It was already slightly off the run, as we would say in the treasury bond business. And the rest is history. She writes back to me and says, that was such an inspiring book. 25 years on, would you like to come and ring my bell? And I mean, that's a low latency answer if ever there is one. I'm there. I mean, it's like, I'm packing.
You were there. We always find, and we talked a little bit here even this time about your views on exchanges and clearinghouses. What do you like about the exchange model, and what do you think needs to be fixed or doesn't work?
I love the exchange model. I don't just like it. And think about it this way. The exchange model is an open to everybody market opportunity. It should be as free as possible of wrinkles and obvious biases towards other people. The exchange is a very, very enlightened, independent player in the middle. The exchange works by getting the most business to happen. So therefore, if we look at the bell curve of exchanges, the bell curve is that the exchange doesn't want to help this group or this group. It wants to get right into the middle of that bell curve and help everybody, because that's where it works. But then when that works, everybody profits. So it's a win-win business model for everybody. And if you take that and extrapolate that through thousands of years, from the ancient Roman, ancient Greek agora all the way through to today, what do we see? Well, actually, here on the New York Stock Exchange, the good folks of the Securities and Exchange Commission are very eager to make sure that everything is regulated well and so on. And that is a good thing because it makes for a better market. But actually, the exchange model is the dominant model of electronic commerce today. And if you think about it, when you get up in the morning, even if you don't go to the exchange, you will likely deal with any of Airbnb, Lyft, Uber, Mercado Libre if you're in South America, Amazon, these are all exchange models. They are essentially balanced to try and drive as much commerce as possible by being independent and not a vendor. And I suppose one of the things that triggers me, Jen, is going to things like startup conferences, which I love. I love the energy. We've been involved in startups for many years. But you go there and somebody goes, do you know what's incredible? I mean, Uber, they don't own any taxi cabs. And it's like, well, of course not. Yeah. It's an exchange. I mean, I talk about Young's pyramid of exchanges, essentially a triangle where you're looking at the very largest exchanges. Congratulations, by the way, on behalf of the Intercontinental Exchange Group, you're good grief, the better part of $10 billion ahead at the top of that pyramid alone, and that's a great sign of a great business well run. But you know, where I get really excited is, yeah, the top of the pyramid has narrowed a lot, which I prophesied in Capital Market Revolution. A lot of those futures exchanges I specifically mentioned, I said will be merged into large entities, and therefore we've seen the likes of Chicago Board of Trade go to CME, but we've also got NYSE, NYBOT, all those other businesses, Life, that have become part of Intercontinental, etc. But what's really exciting is, look at the Life at the bottom of the pyramid. And what's really exciting about that is, with the kindest will in the world, the Intercontinental Exchanges group management can't even see the exchanges that are being built at the bottom of the pyramid, and nor should they, because these are tiny, tiny enterprises where people are trying to get into the business of adding liquidity. And one of the first things we saw this morning was the original call sheet, the details from 1792 of what was being traded in New York. You look at the incredible way that they were trading duck fat. They were trading every possible component of every kind of commodity, wheat and timber and all sorts of things, which were being delivered to build the 19th century New York at the time. And that's why I'm super optimistic, because there's nothing on this earth that is not better when you can get the great watchword, the slogan of the Capital Market Revolution was liquidity, accessibility, transparency. If you create an open market, if you create an opportunity for everybody to get into that marketplace and trade, then you will have better pricing, a more transparent market, and a better opportunity for everybody to trade back and forward, and therefore deliver value and indeed provide better priced, better sourced materials to people around the world so that they can go about, and we create the relationship between Wall Street and Main Street. And that's something I think some days I wake up, you ask me what worries me. I wake up in the morning and I think, look, I love all of the great modern innovations of the Wall Street market. I love the things that have gone on in things, for example, like yield curve trading and stuff like that, which appears like gobbledygook to the majority of people. But of course, if you're a European far away from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, you rely on those people because they're the people that can fix your mortgage. If you have the opportunity to be a consumer, and that's what we need to do better, is communicating how these people doing weird, wacky and wonderful trades in often exotic instruments are actually making day-to-day life better, cheaper and more cost-effective and more efficient with higher quality product for all the citizens around us, and delivering the opportunity for people to create jobs, to be entrepreneurs in every walk of life, thanks to the exchange model as the epicenter of funding. And that's why we're in a business of bringing together the opportunity that anybody from anywhere can become somebody somewhere, thanks to the financing model that's provided on the New York Stock Exchange, on the Intercontinental Group of Exchanges, and throughout Young's pyramid of more than 500 different bourses around the world, trading all manner of fascinating products.
Now, I wanted to know who was, of all the people you've interviewed, who was I guess the most favorite or the most exciting?
There are a number of people who've been fascinating to meet and interview. Some of them, sadly, I don't have recorded when I've talked to them or I talked to them in print. Certainly, again, the people I mentioned, Rory Collins, the Chief Technology Officer of the ASX. But I would say, look, at the moment, I mean, who really inspires me? There's one man that I think is absolutely awesome. He's one of the greatest entrepreneurs, I think, in the history of the United States of America. And I mean, that, let's face it, is way more competitive than any field sport that we can think of in the USA. And that's your ultimate boss, Jeffrey Sprecher. I mean, he's a man who has come from nothing in the exchange world. He foresaw the whole way that a revolution could break. He changed his model, he kept shuffling, he kept hustling, and essentially he's like the Edison of markets. And look, I just don't know what it must be like to be him, because I bounce through the door of the New York Stock Exchange and I think, this is the greatest place I've ever been. To walk through the door of the New York Stock Exchange and think you've been chairman, you've bought the New York Stock Exchange, it's got to be incredible. But he's truly inspirational, and I've never, ever had an encounter that didn't yield amazing value. And that's the wonder of the relationships that we can have in exchanges with some of the great men and women that are around today.